Hi, welcome to It Takes a Village. I am Jenny Schultz-Thomas. I am joined here with my co-host, Sarah Rensel-Jones. We are so happy to be back. So much has happened in the last week. It has been very cold here in Nebraska. It has lightly snowed and called a dusting. My children even tried to sled on the little dusting. But really, a lot has happened in all of our lives, probably. We have been talking about a new book to me from Dr. Keltner called Awe, The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. On It Takes a Village, we talk a lot about community connections, how to create spaces for belonging, and that we are all on this journey together. So we are going to dive into what he calls the 8 wonders of awe. We talked last week about the first 4 wonders of awe, and now we have 4 more amazing opportunities to learn from Keltner's research. So that the first thing that we're going to discuss, and I think this is part of our normal conversation here in the life of sacred spaces and clergy, is the vastness of life and death. Life and death. I mean, just thinking about that. I mean, there's so much awe in the human story, the beginnings, the endings. And Sarah, you as a chaplain, I'm sure have a lot to bring to this conversation. So even before we get to his work, what strikes you when you think about awe and this sort of vastness of the human experience from life and death?
Sure. Well, I think as I think about the death side, which I guess is sort of what I'm more prone to think about as a chaplain, I've kind of come to feel like when there is a death or when someone is near their death, there's sort of like a thinning of the veil. And almost feels like there's an accessibility to this sort of thin place kind of idea. That's a term that's used for places around the world where it feels kind of mystical and like it's a sacred place where maybe you're more apt to connect with the divine and with less effort. So I think when people are near their death, it's one of life's great mysteries, because even if people have near-death experiences and come back to share about it, I think, number one, there's a lot of skepticism about it, and number two, it can't be proven. And so it's one of these things that we really don't know what happens. But even knowing that life, it just puts such a fine point on how precious life is. And the idea that wherever that person is going after they die, presumably heaven, or somehow into like a spiritual realm without their body is just really profound.
Just thinking about that, I mean, there's just this awe, which is really inexplicable, right? It's basically the definition, understanding that there's something much larger than us, right? Even experiential, we can point to things that are beyond our knowing, right? And then what you're talking about, this veil, the thinning of the veil, is maybe there's a deeper knowing that we are still learning, like deep within us. One of the things that Keltner discusses, or actually introduces, the work of Roshi Joan in her book, Being with Dying. And she's one of those people who was a researcher and then decided, I'm kind of fed up with academia, and so I'm going to buy a bus, get it, put it on a ferry and go to North Africa and drive around and learn for myself what it means to work alongside humans who have great capacity to teach me maybe what books aren't able to do. So she does this, and then she completes her work, and she finally ends up in New Mexico, leading a Zen center, connecting people to the vastness of their lives so that they might live and end well. So he talks about one of the things that you said. She, in her book, has these 3 different practices in being with dying. And the first principle is not knowing. Not knowing, because we don't know. No one knows. And my son always asks me exactly what happens this or what happens. And the hardest thing sometimes is the most beautiful. And we don't know. And that we don't have to have those answers, but we can lean into what we don't know and try to not learn it with our minds and heads, but maybe receive, right, and absorb what the human story tells us. So we don't truly know what dying is, or what happens after, right? We have a faith tradition and stories across religious experiences. People point to afterlife experiences. But, she just says, be open and observe and wonder. And the second is, of course, to bear witness. And this is a lot of our experience in working with members and beloved community members, and watching and being present with and just observing and bearing witness to their lives and their passing. And she says, just be there, right? Listen, sit in the silence. And then finally, find compassionate action. If there is anything to be done. I remember one of my most intimate experiences with dying was with a 16-year-old, one of my students who I was close with, worked with for several years, and she had a rare form of cancer, and so she passed, and I was with her family in the days leading up, and then there in her room when she was dying. And I remember the family asking me, would I sing something? I think it was like the most vulnerable and most beautiful moment, because I'm not a singer. And of course, this family is on her bed. Her sisters are sitting around, parents, and this has been a long 9 months kind of road. And she's taking her dying breaths, and they said, would you sing something? And I don't even remember, what happened in that moment, but it was that compassionate action where spirit just sings for you something. I don't even know what it was like, this little light of mine or something really, but the compassion is just, it's not even a choice. It's like the deep spirit of love within you just kind of wells up and overflows because you're just there. You're bearing witness, but you're also letting spirit be compassionate through within you, right? I know, have you had experiences, I'm sure you have, Sarah, where this compassionate action kind of just takes over?
Yeah. I mean, it's, and in all different ways, and in ways that don't make sense. I remember having a patient when I was hospital chaplain on Kauai, and he was just so dear, and our palliative care team worked with him. And there was one day where he was sort of not very awake, and I just sat by his bed. I remember like singing Precious Lord, Take My Hand. And and it's just such an interesting, he was so lovable, just really easy to love. And he didn't live much longer after that, and it really made an impression on me, just having someone's presence pull that out of you, right? It sounds like that kind of what happened to you too. And whether it's the person themselves who is dying or their family, I think that invitation to bring something of yourself that's not polished, it's not practiced, it's just genuine. And even if you think like, I don't have anything to give. I mean, in some ways it feels like, the lyrics to In the Bleak Midwinter, like, what can I give? Give my heart, Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I think that's this whole understanding of life and death is really not separate, right? It's really all life and the different stages of life and the passing of life and what it looks like. How death is on this side of our transition, I will say, right? We see death as an end point. And so it's almost this destination where you hope to have a great life and then help people ease into their wonderful death. But seeing even the death as the living part might encourage us to bring more of that kind of genuine self before the moments of acute need or the depths of do this in a moment. Maybe it brings this sort of understanding that we are called and we can be that compassionate, active, presence before the moments are kind of at the end. I just think about how we don't have a great culture of or enculturating our children, generation, adults for how to live and die.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yes.
But still so beautiful. Of course, in this research, there's so many amazing stories about life and birth, right, across different places. There was one from Japan that I thought was really beautiful. And I guess this one resonated with me, but it was about the responsibilities of protecting new life. This mother said, when I gave birth to a child for the first time, I was deeply moved by the realization and responsibility of becoming a parent, as well as the preciousness of life. From now on, I felt that I would desperately live just to protect this life. And that's so often, right, how it feels to parent or be caregiver of another little person, human. So many stories of life and how we are interconnected, right, to all living things, but especially as we see ourselves connected to new life, which could be the birth of a child. But there's so many amazing ways that I think this research tells us that we have more to learn about how we can be present to each moment of life's passing. His next wonder of awe is moral beauty. I know. It's beautiful. I wanted to read this quote from Toni Morrison, which is just very appropriate. Moral beauty. And this subtext of this chapter is how others' kindness, courage, and overcoming inspire awe. So Toni Morrison, over time, these last 40 years, I have become more and more invested in making sure acts of goodness, however casual or deliberate or misapplied, produce language. Allowing goodness its own speech does not annihilate evil, but it does allow me to signify my own understanding of goodness, the acquisition of self-knowledge. Gosh, in reading this and rereading this, I immediately, went to Bishop Buddy's response, in preaching, the Episcopal bishop, in preaching the sermon in Washington, while President Trump was sitting with his family and Vance and all in the audience. And I'm not going to make this a political kind of comment, but moral beauty is looking and at awe on someone's moral courage. And to think that someone could be so brave and also so honest and have this deep courage in her moral conviction, in her faith and her spiritual conviction, to speak just a word of truth from our faith across different religious understandings about mercy, pleading on behalf of marginalized peoples. I feel like, just immediately, moral beauty and moral courage to say, in spite of any judgment or whatever might happen to you, this is a moment that I am standing right here, and upon me is this deep understanding of the one very truth and message and language, right? Toni Morrison said, goodness, I want to ascribe language to these moments of goodness. And they don't annihilate evil, but what they do is open up an understanding that this deep courage is also within you. If you might only listen to this plea, which comes from the living God. Yeah, so I think the world is kind of in awe. Many people on both sides of that, whether you are angry about that message or you are in awe of that courage. I think that's just a great example of what it means to have moral beauty.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it just pulls something out of us to see someone do something really remarkable. And, like in the literal term of like to be remarked upon,
yes.
Right? Like this is so wonderful that someone would take this risk, right?
Yes.
That's something that maybe people wouldn't expect.
Yes.
That demonstrates this real plumb line of connection with what is right. I mean, you use the expression often like the next faithful step, right? The next faithful action.
Yes.
And I think sometimes there is this sort of cultural culmination of moments like that,
Right.
And then there's other times where it's a smaller act, but it's also beautiful because it's like just the right thing.
Yes, it's just the right thing. And I think one of the things about moments like that, because it is a projection of a lot of different social, political, and cultural kind of emphases that people are unarticulated, the unarticulated vision and moral courage bear upon this moment. And so it's this, ripple effect where it's, wow, this person is actually doing this. And I think one of our colleagues wrote a response, Reverend Lori Waukee, about this experience and sort of calling, it was the remarkable but the unremarkable. And basically that Bishop Buddy would have, just like any of us, is preaching a word of God, the word of God, right? The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to, set the captives free, to give sight to the blind, to have mercy for the orphan and the widow. And she's preaching a very ancient text, right? And so it's unremarkable, but it's so remarkable to actually see that kind of courage lived out and it be connected so deeply to the resonance with so many of our spirits. And so that unarticulated vision becomes a widely pronounced, articulated moral compass now. That's going to be an accountable kind of compass.
Yeah.
So, right, I mean, sometimes the profound is the antithesis of what we would name that, which is so simple and true and, scripture,
Right.
If you just bear it down to a scroll.
Right.
Right?
Well, and thinking about, like, she has been, plugging along, doing her work. I mean,
Right.
clearly in an elevated position. It's not like she just came
Of
out of,
course.
a tiny little country church, but someone could, and they've been faithfully practicing their faith, being a pastor, a leader, a leader in the church and the denomination, and then have this opportunity. Like, I had never heard of her
Yeah.
before this week.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like she's like a big, what I call church famous
Yeah,
person, or
right.
even culturally, societally famous.
Right, exactly.
And I mean, she is now, but that faithfulness, something like this doesn't just happen out of nowhere, and you can tell that she's been practicing what she preaches,
Yes.
literally, for a long time.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And this week, of course, I was thinking a lot about this, about bringing like a word, right, of biblical proclamation in a moment like this. But with MLK, the observance of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, the speech that I referenced that my friend shared, Beyond Vietnam, about breaking the silence. One of Dr. King's most quoted, I think, phrases that only show up in these kind of acute, difficult moments is about that this moment and this kind of moral courage is an agonizing position to be in. But he says, still, we must speak. Right? And so it's not like you're speaking of, Bishop Buddy is not like, woo, yay, now I'm famous.
Right. No.
It's a deep, agonizing call to respond to. But still, she speaks. So moral courage, moral beauty, I think we recognize it, right? On either side, no matter what you bring, your own feelings or ideas or political identity, you just recognize when something like this happens. So I think it's one of those things that shocks the world, right? And then we are called to respond. Another one is epiphanies, and it's not very unsimilar to this kind of moral beauty or moral courage, but epiphanies can be philosophical insights or profound teachings. Kellner highlights universal moments such as the philosophical depth of Confucianism or indigenous wisdom traditions, which he says expand our mental horizons and invite curiosity to the world's unique mysteries, which is just a great sentence. I mean, philosophical understandings, deep indigenous wisdom tradition. I mean, the mysteries of the universe. I think epiphanies can be very secularized in a way that allow anyone to access this wisdom rather than only from a deep religious tradition. When you hear the word epiphany, I'm sure a lot of things come to mind, but epiphany and awe, what does that bring to the surface for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think about I forget who coined it, if it was Oprah or someone before her, talking about aha moments.
Oh, okay.
And then I know that, we don't necessarily, I think it got a little overused for a while, like everyone's having aha moments all day, every day.
I didn't even know that was a recent,
I don't know how long ago. It might be like 10
cute.
years ago by now, and everyone was over it.
Aha moments.
So I'm bringing it back.
Hey.
Anyway, I think that there are those times where maybe we're like mulling over something, and then we have this epiphany, we have this awareness. Maybe it feels like a solution comes to us, or, we hear something from a wisdom tradition that helps shed light on a problem in a new way, that we just kind of have this like, oh my gosh, like there it is. Things are clicking into place for me. I mean, that's how I kind of experience what I would describe as an epiphany.
Yes.
Is often if I'm sort of ruminating on something I don't understand, or, kind of like, why did things happen that way? And then something will come to my mind, or someone will say something, and I will think like, okay, wow, that's like a revelation to me.
Yeah.
And that does inspire awe.
Yeah. I love that. Those revelations that feel unexpected, and yet you can't imagine yourself going back without that deep understanding. I think about it as this elevated consciousness, right? They were always being called, if you know that, the Jewish mystic tradition of the Kabbalah, practicing moving up the tree, one limb at a time almost, but how we're always being called to evolve and refine as closer to, nirvana, love, enlightenment, all the ways that we do speak about that in our traditions. So Kellner actually starts with Darwin, and so evolution and this understanding of mobilizing across our human limitations to higher capacities. He starts with this quote: "Whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved." I think that's, thinking of Darwin, in general, his own personal life, right? What an evolution of his own understanding, and then experiences with reason and deeper enlightenment evolved his own ideas, right, and philosophies. And so you think of someone like David Brooks, right, someone whose self-acclaimed awareness and understanding moves them from one state of consciousness to another. I think epiphany, as you're talking about, these aha moments, have almost a sensationalist kind of surrounding with, this big idea that changes the world, or this big idea. I think of like the Hubble telescope, right? Whoa, there are so many of those things that can be so big and almost out of reach. But then when we have these ourselves, right, we have one understanding about how the world works, or how I am self-aware and how I'm working. And then you learn, it just impresses upon you in ways that change and transform you. And I would hope always, right, with evolution and enlightenment, it's toward love and wholeness, right? So then you're then you're able to be a loving presence that transforms and refines your own ecosystem. So I love that he starts with Darwin. I think that's, I would love to dive more into this in this chapter, but that's both a risk and it can be a blessing. But I think that's the truth with any kind of philosophy that you unpack, right? Is it tabula rasa, or is it manifest destiny, right? Where are we on that kind of spectrum?
Yeah. I think any of these, I think that I'm really grateful that we have a kind of faith that is open to incorporating all the things we're talking about. Because I think about even our conversation around, what happens after people die.
Yeah.
We could be in a setting where someone would say, well, this is what it is, and that's the answer, and why are you even considering this, right?
Exactly.
And it's like, we know there's so many people have so many experiences that already disprove like the one sentence, this is what the answer is, kind of thing. But we have to be open to considering other traditions, other perspectives, and I think that brings in a sense of awe. To me, that's like full of possibility versus there's one answer, this is what it is, end of story. If you believe something otherwise, you're wrong.
You're wrong.
Yeah.
I have the answer, right, Sarah?
Yes.
The pastors know all.
I defer to Jenny.
I defer to Sarah. Well, I think that is actually, that's kind of why we're here. That's why we do this work. I know that's why I do this work, because I don't have to have all the answers. And that there's such a freedom in diving into the mystery and the wonder of how it is that we're always evolving into our better selves. And I would say better as in just more loving, more whole, more forgiving. And it does come from our faith. The final awe and wonder that we're going to discuss is spiritual and religious experiences, right? And saving that for the last is sort of all of these things that we've talked about, I think, are part of the spiritual and religious, right? Religion, right? The ceremonious liturgies that we create, whether they are buildings, right, that define something, that's a religion. To a great pyramid, right, that holds steady civilizations as the world is turning their backs on each other. Religion, right? How we have modified and commodified the human experience, our souls, our spirits. And then spirituality, how we then juxtapose our religious traditions and our icons and all the things that we think are, or we pretend are, God. Then we have this opportunity to step back and say, wow, look at what I don't know. Look at the mystery and look at the wonder and look at deconstructing this has given me something new. And I'm evolving. My consciousness now sees love, not creating a space that love might dwell, but that we are, right? These vessels, these sharpening vessels. So spirituality and religion, right? Two of the biggest questions in a part of the human experience. So how do we then look at all that we've understood about awe, these deep wonders, and name that which is awe-invoking or awe-inspiring in our own spirituality?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that spiritual and religious experiences have always been just, I don't know, sort of like what I live for.
Yeah.
You know, beyond my children and my husband and, you know, wanting to be on earth for my family and meaningful work. It's like those experiences that you have for these moments where something happens that just is almost beyond comprehension, and yet you are experiencing it, and whether it's something that feels like it comes from the divine or happens based on the interaction of love and divinity within people, sort of like that spark in me sees the spark in you, and something almost miraculous happens. To me, it's like that's what keeps me going. If you could tell me, hey, something like that is going to happen to you today, I'd be like, okay, I'm out of bed, I'm ready to go.
Yes.
Let's find out.
That's so true. That's so beautiful, Sarah. I remember when I was a teenager going on a mission trip. I went to like a really big Southern Baptist church in Louisville, Kentucky. And Tim Tebow's father was the missionary who I was going with. And he took us on the trip to the Philippines, and he handed all of us a folder. And it was a blue folder, and on the front, it had this orange sticker. And it said, hot, hot, hot on the front. And it was his 5-year plan to save all of the Philippines.
Oh.
And so, of course, I was like, oh, yeah, sign me up for that. Well, so I go to the Philippines, and this has nothing to do with saving all the people. I was supposed to memorize this whole book of scriptures and then go into all these schools and stand up and say, you know, all these testimonies and read these scriptures and say, who wants to be saved? And they would all raise their hand, and somebody else would throw them candy. So that's his 5-year plan to save the Philippines. But another saving story, we got on this bus, it's called a jeepney, and went way up into the mountains, into this village. And we were kind of just waiting around. I don't even really know what we were supposed to be doing, but we were eating, and these host families invited us to eat. And I went into this family's home, which was like dirt floors, barely a home. It did have like a roof, and they were feeding us a meal. And there was another, like a teenage girl around my same age, and we could not really communicate. I could say like only the songs in Mindanao that they told me to memorize. But I had this deep spiritual experience just sitting at the table with her and looking at each other deeply into each other's eyes. And I was already basically in my journal, like, this is not God. This is not, like, journaling every single day about the unlearning, right, of, you know, who I am and who we are as people and what we're called to do. But I had this deep understanding that it wasn't me who was saving her. It was her, and it was, you know, the human experience of hospitality and love and wholeness and what it means to be a presence of God, right? So understanding these spiritual experiences without words, where God is always reflecting and being reflected in the other. And if we listen without words, we're going to learn a lot more than if we try to articulate some great, beautiful mission or tell someone who they are.
Absolutely.
Wow, lots of, we could all day, right? Lots of stories, lots of opportunities to learn and grow together. But we are so excited about this book, and we hope that as you are experiencing your own daily lives, that you can stop and just have one experience of awe. And it might just be watching the snowflakes and picking one and seeing that beautiful constellation for its little self and its bigger self and how we're all a part of it. But yeah, thank you, Sarah. I think that Dr. Keltner will be here in Omaha at some point this spring, giving a lecture, I think, at the Holland. When we do have that information, we will share it. But yeah, we are here for it, and we hope that this journey is meaningful for you. Reach out if we can support you. We'll see you next week.